try!
Right to...
That's it, mate.
We're all set, everyone?
Everyone good? Okay, thanks for coming today, everyone. Immediately to my right, you have ARU CEO Bill Pulver, and on his right, you have the ARU Chairman Cameron Clyne. The way this is going to work today is Cameron's going to provide an opening address, and then we can take questions from there. So I'll leave it with Cameron.
Thanks, Mick. And thank you all for coming. As Mick said, I'll make an opening statement, and then we'll happily take questions for as long as you would like to ask them. Today I confirm that the ARU board has made the decision to remove one Australian team from the Super Rugby competition from 2018. As announced by SANZAAR last night, Super Rugby will revert to a 15-team format from next season, with one team from Australia and two teams from South Africa to be removed from the current 18-team competition. From 2018, the Australian Super Rugby Conference will feature 4 teams from Australia and the Sunwolves from Japan. It's important for me to clarify firstly that the decision to remove a Super Rugby team from Australia was a decision made by the ARU, not by SANZAAR. This outcome, however, was only made possible by a consensus vote by the 4 SANZAAR partners and has been a complex process involving many stakeholders in the competition across the globe. This process was finally completed yesterday. We agreed that the 18-team competition was unsustainable and that a return to a 15-team competition will provide a more engaging and overall improved product for rugby fans. We're also very grateful to our broadcast partner Fox Sports, which has been steadfast in its support for the ARU through this process and since the inception of Super Rugby in 1996. Almost immediately upon expansion to 5 teams, it became apparent that Australia could not sustain that number of teams. The financial drain, coupled with the fact that each team is an independent entity and make decisions accordingly, placed a significant strain on funding. However, having made the decision to expand to 5 teams in 2011, we wanted to try everything to make it work. This included increasing collaboration across the teams as well as exploring new business models. Until this current SANZAAR review, there was no opportunity to remove an Australian team without the ARU having to provide significant compensation. Therefore, we had to try and make it work. Super Rugby has placed an increasingly heavy burden on the ARU business in recent years, and the acceleration of revenue declines in our Super Rugby businesses has placed the game under extreme financial pressure. Over the past decade, the ARU has had to provide financial assistance to all but one of our Super Rugby teams on at least one occasion, and we need to operate on the assumption that will happen again given what we are currently seeing. The additional funding provided by the ARU to offset Super Rugby losses has severely limited our capacity to invest in our grassroots and high-performance areas such as player and coach development. Since our expansion, the economy operating globally has also changed dramatically. With the incentives on offer in Europe, the player exodus has been significant in Australia and indeed across our SANZAAR partners. Based on recent performance trends, it is evident that we do not currently have the playing depth in Australia to service 5 teams in Super Rugby. Performance declines by our teams since the expansion of Super Rugby has had a direct correlation with declines in revenue across their businesses. At the request of the board, ARU management completed an exhaustive analysis on 3 of our teams: the Brumbies, the Western Force and the Melbourne Rebels. The purpose of the analysis is to assess each of these teams on their financial sustainability, high-performance outcomes and commercial factors, examining a range of metrics with a view to identifying which of those 3 teams to remove from the competition. After reviewing management's findings, the board made the decision to eliminate the Brumbies from the process and identified that consultation is required with both the Western Force and Melbourne Rebels to further understand their financial position. We don't anticipate this final consultation period being a very drawn-out process, and expect to be able to deliver an outcome in the very near future. Importantly, we will support this decision with a clear plan of how we distribute the savings resulting from the removal of a Super Rugby team. With sports all over the world facing shifting attitudes and behaviours of younger generations with regards to their entertainment preferences, sports participation and attendance must continue to evolve and energise at the grassroots level to attract more young boys and girls into our game. To do this effectively will require serious investment, and the majority of our savings in Super Rugby from this decision will be channelled directly into grassroots initiatives. The ARU is also heavily underinvested, particularly in comparison to our major international rivals at the professional level. We must also address the areas of player and coach development, as well as our match officials and pathways programs. Whilst we didn't want to be in this position today, we must now look forward to the betterment of the game. Thank you, and happy to open it to questions.
Cameron, when can we expect a decision on which team's going to be axed?
We would hope in the next 48 to 72 hours. We've done a lot of work, obviously, but we want to make sure there's due process and that we're making a decision based on the data being validated. But we don't anticipate this dragging on. South Africa obviously have not announced their teams. They're going through a process as well.
The Rebels being privately owned, does that give them an edge in this battle?
No, we're looking at obviously we're looking at what is the right for teams going forward.
Would that involve a buyout?
I don't want to get into any sort of, we're just going through and validating assumptions, but we do anticipate that, this will not be the end of financial assistance to the Super Rugby. I mean, this even though we end up with 4 teams. So we are...
But you would know the process of, if the Rebels had to go, you would know whether that's going to be a buyout or not.
Oh, I'm just saying we're not sort of getting into speculating what the options would be, but what we want to make sure is that we do anticipate there's likely to be financial assistance going forward, even with reducing to 4 teams. That's the nature of the financial pressure that the game is under. So we're just looking at what are the best models to minimise that outcome.
So is Andrew Cox giving you a buyout figure?
We're not going to go into the sort of commercial discussions around that, I think. But we are talking to both parties.
Does the ARU have a preference?
We've not expressed a preference. I mean, our preference is for a sustainable competition.
Why were you not able to come to a decision? You eliminated the Brumbies, but why are we still waiting for...
Because we want to validate the information. This is a big decision. We want to make sure that the information that we're making the decision on, and we owe it to those franchises to test our assumptions. So that's why we think the decision would be quick, but we want to give them the opportunity to say these are the financial data we're seeing, is it valid?
And why could they not have given that to you earlier in the process?
Well, we've been having an ongoing discussion, but we want to go back. Things are moving, and then obviously people are looking at changing their models and getting revenue. We just want to test those assumptions.
What are the key criteria that you make the decision on?
Look, it's a raft of criteria. It's based on the future attractiveness of that market, the sponsors, fan engagement in those markets, high performance outcomes, views from a whole range of stakeholders. So we're looking at it across a whole series of metrics.
What about the Brumbies put them in the clear?
They met all the criteria.
What in particular? Was it a financial?
Financial governance, high performance outcomes, future sponsorship, a range of issues that indicated they will be a sustainable presence and therefore would not need to be considered for elimination at this point.
Was the board split yesterday on which team should be cut?
We had a general discussion. I can certainly say the decision to cut the teams from 5 to 4 was an 8-1 vote. So it was not unanimous. There was one director that did not support it, but the 8 directors supported going from 5 to 4.
And did you take a vote on which team it should be?
No, we had an indicative discussion, but we indicated where we wanted more information.
Is there a deadline?
Well, ideally, we want this resolved as quickly as possible. We'd like to have it wrapped up by the end of this week, and if we can validate the data, that'll be the case.
So what are your thoughts when you see the Force players, some of them reduced to tears after that win last night, knowing that rugby might die in their states?
Look, it's not something I would ever have liked to have happened in rugby. I mean, I've always been had a preference for 5 teams in Super Rugby. When we did the new broadcast deal in 2015 and we grew revenue there 150%, I think we were, at the time, comfortable that the financial state of the game could perpetuate 5 teams. That led us to put another $13 million of investment into Super Rugby in 2016. And despite doing that, if you look from 2013 to 2017, we will have spent an incremental $28 million unbudgeted on Super Rugby. So sadly, it is very clear to me now that we cannot sustain 5 teams, either from a financial perspective or a high performance perspective. So look, it's tragic to think of one team being dropped, but long term, this is in the best interests of Australian rugby.
Would you consider walking away from Super Rugby altogether and formulating an Australian-New Zealand?
You know, look, in a strategic planning sense, we consider all of the options, but there's great merit from a high performance perspective in competing against the best in the world. And that's what we get. And look, I would tell you that despite all of the challenges we're seeing in Super Rugby, it's great rugby, right? You saw 2 of the bottom teams yesterday, the Kings and the Force, competing in a fabulous game of football. But sadly, the economic model is not working and we need to make a change. Long-term health of this game is driven by revenue growth and participation growth. Revenue growth you get in the short term from better high performance outcomes, but the long-term fix for the game is more young boys and girls playing the game. And in the current financial environment, we are seriously underinvested in the grassroots. We need to fix that.
I just want to pick up 2 points there. One is, yes, you're right to focus, and it is an emotional situation. I saw the Force, but having engaged substantially to community rugby, I also see that emotion at the community level where they're saying we're not getting the money. You know, they do see and they feel that the investment and the additional funding, some 28 million unbudgeted funding on top of the 30 million increase has gone to Super Rugby. That's 28 million that could have gone to grassroots. We see that day in, day out with volunteers at the grassroots level. So we need to focus on their disappointment as well. On the Trans-Tasman, we explored the Trans-Tasman option. There was no appetite from New Zealand to pursue that competition.
When did you explore that?
We've explored it extensively and we've explored it through this process. There was no appetite from New Zealand for a Trans-Tasman competition. So I need to put that, sort of a view that we can throw down and, stand up and do a whole range of things. That requires a willing partner. We didn't have a willing partner.
Did you ever consider going it alone?
That is a very unattractive financial option.
It's a big chunk of money. Did either of you consider standing aside over this?
With regard to what?
Well, obviously the 26 million. It's a lot of money to lose.
The Super Rugby franchise are independently run. So, we're not at all... shy of accountability here. And I should say, I'm not also sheeting the home blame there because, the reality is the Super Rugby franchises do develop players and a range of things, but, those are independent franchises and we have a very complex governance model and those franchises operate independently. But ultimately, when financial trouble emerges, the ARU is the lender of last resort, and we have been. And we provided that funding, but they're not necessarily losses that have been engendered because of ARU decisions in all cases.
Bill, do you concede that the ongoing uncertainties had a negative effect on the club the last few months?
Yeah, look, no question. I think that the atmosphere we have around the game at the moment, in particular in relation to Super Rugby, is unfortunate. And that's despite the fact that I think the Super Rugby matches are superb. We're still playing the game they play in heaven. We need to deal with this issue in order to allow the game to move forward. And you've seen my shift over the last 4 to 5 years, where I now have a very clear view that we need to go to 4 teams. We've got to start investing in growing participation rates again, because that's the long-term best measure of health of the game.
Why did Australia sign up for a Super 18 when the warnings were there that it wasn't financially sustainable?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. And look, let me say up front, I think in retrospect that was probably a mistake. But at the time, we had a partner in South African Rugby Union who had a very complex political environment where the government was essentially saying, unless you field the additional team of the Kings, you're out. We had Argentina, who'd been a really constructive addition to the Rugby Championship, but saying that they had to keep their players in Argentina through the presence of a Super Rugby team. And we saw the economic merit, the growth, the expansionary merit of having a Japanese team. But look, sitting here today, I acknowledge that that was a mistake, right? That competition has not delivered the outcomes we wanted. I'm not, however, convinced that it's the 18-team competition that has led us to losing a team today. There are underlying financial trends that are problematic for sport, right, that really I think would have got us to the same position anyway, where Australia, from a financial perspective and a high-performance perspective, can only afford 4 teams.
You obviously heeded the warnings on behalf of your other SANZAR partners that they were getting from their constituents. You were getting really strong, clear warnings internally about what that structure might do to the game here. Why didn't you listen to those?
Look, at the time, it wasn't an option for a reduction in the competition. It was an option to expand the competition. And, you know, in any business, you're looking for growth opportunity, right? And the ideal outcome from that would have been opening up new markets which provided revenue growth opportunities for the game. Now, sadly, the adverse effect has been, you know, fans have seen a complex competition structure that didn't really work for them. It's seen more travel than they really wanted, and games played outside time zones that were convenient. So I acknowledge the mistake of that decision, but at the time there wasn't an option to drop to 4 teams.
Yeah, I think, as I said, it became clear almost immediately upon expansion this was a financial problem. Had we didn't have the option at the time of the 18, yes, we heard those warnings, we didn't have the option, and we wanted to try and make 5 teams work. As Bill said, we didn't have the option of reducing a team without compensation. This was, well, it stands up to you know, the other joint venture partners, because we now what this review was an opportunity to throw open the whole competition, and what makes this possible through the support of our partners is a reduced format under a similar funding profile, which allows us to take, I mean, that's the whole point. We want to actually provide financial security for the game. This is an opportunity to do that and to take the savings that we'll generate and redirect those savings to grassroots rugby. We still anticipate we are probably going to have to provide financial assistance to the remaining 4 teams, but we want that to be a case where it will not necessarily distract from the grassroots funding. Had we not, had we made a decision prior to this, it would have been a very financially difficult decision for the ARU, because we would have had to basically been compensating and breaking a joint venture agreement. This was the first opportunity we had to do it, but this has been on the cards almost since the expansion occurred in 2011.
Will you have to? Will this affect Australia's position at the next broadcast deal, considering you're not fielding as many teams and contributing as much content?
Well, it's a good question, and to be determined clearly. I mean, I don't want to leave the impression that we think this 15-team structure is necessarily the perfect long-term solution either. This is still a strategic plan, work in progress, if you like. And that's really, we've got to wait to see what the 2021 competition looks like before we get some assessment of what the revenue shares are going to be.
Did you seek any assurances that, you know, if we do this now for the good of SANZAR, that it will not affect us?
We had a conversation. Understand there was a real show of good faith by the SANZAR partners, because both South Africa dropping teams and Australia dropping teams were both allowed to retain their revenue shares. I think, and look, one of the key issues here is the strategic merit of a SANZAR organisation in the first place. It is a powerful component of international rugby. Within SANZAR, there is a very good understanding that we all need to be successful. Right? Each individual national union benefits from a great contest against the other. So there is, even though it's a bunch of fierce competitors, there is a spirit of partnership there, and that was reflected in the outcome of the revenue shares.
And that's right. And the other, you know, whilst this review is being owned, SANZAR has obviously also worked collaboratively on achieving. One of the big problems under any team format was the June break. It's very difficult to break your season, play the June internationals, and then if you're at the bottom half of the table. So SANZAR actually collaborated very well in saying that one of the critical things here we do, which we succeeded, is the first step to the global season, which is that from 2020 or 21? 21. You know, the June international window moves to July, which allows us to have a contiguous super season. That's a huge win. So SANZAR was, you know, working on. So that's a critical part of the format going forward. So there's value in SANZAR as a Southern Hemisphere block. You know, where we are able to collaborate and get outcomes like that, and that's a huge win, and will make a big difference to the competition.
Will you seek to defend your stake, your current stake, about 31%?
Well, when we get there, we'll obviously be. You know, this is what we're certainly doing is at no point through this entire process has there been any other criteria than what's in the best interest of Australian rugby. We're not sacrificing a team to keep Japan in or anything else. We're doing this because we think that it is unsustainable. It is, you know, this is not a consequence-free decision. We understand that. We can soldier on with 5 teams and severely compromise investment at other levels in the game. You know, and by and that will have consequences at the grassroots, and it is having consequences right now. Or we can eliminate a team and redirect the savings, and yes, there'll be consequences for the team that's eliminated. But we've always looked at that through the best lens of Australia, and we think at this point in time, given us an opportunity to maintain our revenue profile with 4 teams, that 4 teams from a high performance and a financial point of view and a significant increase in grassroots funding was the best outcome for Australian rugby. And when we go into the next broadcast, it'll be very clearly a view of Australian rugby. There's no suggestion at any point that we were compromising an Australian team for some grand global vision or to have the Japanese in and everything else. Now, we're not unhappy with the Japanese in our conference with the World Cup in 2019. The fact that our 4 teams will have opportunities to play in Japan is not a bad thing, but there's no suggestion, and it's just incorrect to suggest that we were in any way compromising. 18 teams, 15 teams, we can't afford 5 teams. That's the reality, and that's the decision we had to make.
Bill, you talk about what the competition will look like in 2021, and there's people talking about strategic thought. Given the calamity of a Super 18 in terms of cost versus revenue, would you rule out ARU support for further expansion?
You know, I wouldn't rule anything out right now. The conversation we had earlier was frankly, we within Australia, virtually all the stakeholders do have a preference for an Australasian focus. It's possible that one of the expansionary models could result in a greater Australian focus. So, look, at this point, I think we've got to keep an open mind to all the options.
Yeah, what happens to the players when the team can't, and presumably you're going to expect to lose more players overseas?
So, well, essentially 20% of the professional playing population in the elite men's 15 side will go. The 2 teams that are under consideration both have different levels of players contracted through the end of 17 and through to the end of 18. So essentially there will be, and every single player contract will be honoured. So there'll be an individual discussion with each player in relation to the high performance requirements of the Super Rugby teams and the Australian Rugby Union to resolve that. Nobody will be forced to go anywhere they don't want to go. So it's just going to be an open and honest and frank discussion with each individual player.
What about people who aren't on contract? There are a lot of people who are sitting around waiting for the last few months and trying to decide their future.
Well,
As well.
it's going to be dependent upon whether a Super Rugby club wants to pick them up or whether Australian Rugby wants to retain their presence in our Super Rugby competition. So,
Bill, how sustainable do you think this SANZAR structure is, given how long the process has taken and how much sort of bitterness, I guess, there is from fans and players about the situation?
yeah, look, SANZAR is a very sustainable structure. It is an important component of world rugby, right? And if Australia was acting totally in isolation, I promise you, we would not have as many effective outcomes. I dare say we would not have got the changes to the international match calendar had we not had SANZAR. It was the driving force behind that. In terms of the competition, I mean, Rugby Championship is hugely successful, so nobody wants to change that. And within SANZAR, we all desperately want to find the right model for a healthy future Super Rugby competition. So SANZAR is absolutely sustainable. We've just got some more work to do.
Bill, how concerned are you about the health of the British rugby in either Melbourne or Perth, whichever market goes?
Look, you can't deny it's likely to have an effect, right? I mean, aspirationally, when you have a Super Rugby team in that market, it gives young kids something to strive for. So Cameron said this decision is not without consequence. We acknowledge that. But ultimately, the 2 key drivers that we have to focus on are financial sustainability and high performance outcomes. Better high performance outcomes drives revenue. So sadly, it will have an effect, but that's the consequence of the decision.
Bill, can we just take a step back? So you've made pretty clear that this was an ARU decision to get rid of one of the Australian teams. Yeah. At what point did you push SANZAR to contract the competition? Did you decide?
Look, we initiated at a SANZAR level strategic review of Super Rugby some time ago, working with Accenture. And we saw a year ago trends in the performance of the competition that were not encouraging. So we knew we needed change. From an Australian perspective, basically when you looked at our financial trends, we've had, and this is a sport-wide issue, right? There are revenue trends across many, many sports around the world. And it really led us, we knew for quite some time we needed to go to 4 teams.
But did you push SANZAR to reduce the competition from 18 teams? Was that something that the ARU pushed for?
Yeah, we looked at the time. We looked at all the options. We looked at the option of could we run a domestic-only competition, as Cameron mentioned. Economically, that did not add up. We looked at the option: could we have an Australasian conference? New Zealand did not want that outcome. Really, the only other acceptable outcome was to drop a team in Australia and go to a 15-team competition.
Can you be more specific on when the ARU came to that position?
That was basically in the financial analysis we reviewed through last year showed that we could not sustain that trend. We needed a change. But there were options, but some of them were basically ruled out.
So in November last year, Rob Clark said on the record to the Herald that it wasn't the number of teams, it was about alignment and some of those things you guys have been talking about for a while. When did that change to it is 5?
Well, look, frankly, I can't recall the exact timeline, but we've had data inside the Australian Rugby Union for some time that suggested that the current financial trend was not sustainable. You
must have known as CEO, there must have been a point, considering especially you're a local defender of a national footprint, that this is not going to work anymore.
When you've got 5 teams, you've got to support 5 teams. And the outcome could have been, up until, a day or so ago, that we wouldn't have got the clearance and we may still have 5 teams. You've got to support it because, as I said, unless you had a window to reduce a team and maintain your revenue, it's going to be calamitous for Australian rugby. So you've got to be out there, and we tried everything since this is a trend for 6 years. We've tried everything to support it, and you're going to publicly support it. And it could have been possible we still had to maintain this footprint through to 2018. So we supported it, but we've known it's been clear. I mean, when I joined the board in 2014, the majority of the discussion, the majority of every board meeting, is consumed by the financial drain of Super Rugby. Not the investment we need to make in the huge growth we're seeing in women's rugby. Massive uplift in participation. Our rookie men's sevens team coming 3rd in Hong Kong last night, grassroots participation. These sort of things are not getting the airtime and they're not getting the finances that it needs. And that's just, the reality is, yes, it's taken a long time. It's taken a long time because we've got lots of stakeholders. In the back of my envelope, I counted 47 separate stakeholders, including 13 broadcast partners. Now, it's fantastic to have 13 broadcast partners because it shows the game. Super Rugby is something that people want to consume all around the world. That takes time to negotiate through. We'd rather it took less time. But the reality is that if you're running a business, and that's what we're doing, if you've got the majority of your discussion constantly about one area that is draining financially at the expense of other areas, you have to eventually, when you're given the opportunity, this is the point, this was the opportunity. Had we been given opportunities in other points in the time to reduce the competition and maintain revenue, we hadn't taken it. Absolutely, that was not the case. This was the first opportunity we had, and we took it. It will have consequences, we accept that. We think those consequences will be offset by the uplift in the grassroots investment we're going to make. And that's the reality, and we took that decision. You cannot have a business where you're constantly talking about something that is draining and detracting from other areas of the game.
I'm just asking when it became the ARU's official position.
It's not a question of the official position was that if we could reduce teams and maintain a revenue profile, then we would look at that opportunity. That was not apparent until a day or so ago. But we've looked at every permutation of addressing this financial issue. We've looked at different business models, greater collaboration. Bear in mind these are 5 independent entities, right? Everything we accept as the peak body, everything washes back to us. If the Oranges aren't ready for Coogee under-6s, it's Bill's fault. That's clear. We understand that. But it's a very complex governance model we run. And, these are independent entities. We've got to work with them. We've looked at every conceivable option, including just dropping a team and can we just compensate? That would have been calamitous. This was the first opportunity we had, and that's when we saw that. Then it became ARU policy to act on it.
That was only guaranteed for the next 18 months or until the next broadcast deal. So there must be, can you perhaps then characterise the magnitude of the savings that you think, even if you take a smaller stake in the next broadcast model?
Yeah, well, because there's a lot of focus on each, whether it's the Rebels or the Force becoming independently financially solid. Actually, we need to save the $6 million of funding we're providing to that club. Right? What we need is to get back into the grassroots investment that will bring more young boys and girls into the game. We need to market the game more effectively, and there's some things on the high performance side that we need to do better to deliver better outcomes, because better high performance outcomes delivers revenue. So it's actually the $6 million of funding that goes to this club that we need to save to reinvest in the game.
And what do you think what is the number? What will this allow you
We will once we know and we announce the team, we'll have a better understanding of the financials, and it will be our intention at that point, ideally, and we'll be discussing this at the board today, to be announcing a multi-year grassroots funding package with a number associated. But we need to obviously validate the numbers, but that's our intention to announce that and what the commitment will be.
You can't give us an idea now of
But
financial savings?
So, Georgina, as I said earlier, we've spent 28 million, between 13 and 17, we'll have spent $28 million of unbudgeted funds over and above the 13 million we incrementally put in 16. So we may not eliminate all of that because, as Cameron said, there may still be a requirement to support other remaining Super Rugby teams. On top of that, you've got essentially $6 million of funding per team that will be taken off the table and allowed to reinvest.
It will cost you to, I guess, dismantle one of the clubs.
Yes, it will.
As well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you guys must have a figure. Can you not share that with us?
Well, we'll share it with you in a couple of days. We'd rather share an accurate figure, but we've given you, the indication. Look, what the intention is, and we're quite clear, that the reason for making this decision is that the vast majority of what we save, net of adjustment costs, the vast majority is redirected to the non-professional parts of the game: men's, women's, clubs, schools, community. That's the intention. We want to finalise the numbers because obviously, whichever teams pick, the costs will be different associated with exiting from the competition. Once we do that, we'll be sharing a package over multiple years to give certainty to those people they can rely on that funding. And that's, and I'd say, look, I'm not in any way dismissing the players' uncertainty, but, I'm at community rugby every weekend, be it at school rugby and club rugby, and I see the anguish that the volunteers and those people have as well. That's equally valid, that they have been underfunded, and they see money going in, and they see the losses being generated through at the professional end of the game, and that is an equal concern. And I think we have to remember that, and we're saying we feel that is not healthy for the growth of the game, and so we will be directing the vast majority there, and we'll get you a number at the time we announce the team, because we're going to work through that and have a package, and we'll be announcing that.
Bill, whether you've got this is a right or wrong going forward, there's a perception that Australian rugby is in a mess because it's your doing. Do you think that's fair? Do you think you've still got the backing of the Australian rugby community?
Look, Cameron can answer in terms of whether I've got the backing of the board. The Australian rugby community, look, I acknowledge there's a lot of heartache out there. And believe me, if I thought stepping aside would advantage Australian rugby in any sense at all, I would do it in a heartbeat. Right? I promise you I'm here for the game, and that's the only reason. I am not a professional administrator. I will do one job in my life, and that's in rugby. These issues are tough, right? You've basically got some overarching strategic issues which are negative for all sports, right? Long-term declines in children participating in team sport, behaviours of younger demographics, millennials in particular, who do not consume sport the way previous generations did. Those two variables alone have negative impact on revenue and will forever, right? So this is not a short-term phenomenon. Then you've got Australia in the context of arguably the most competitive winter sports market in the world, and suffering from the challenge of Northern Hemisphere having financially greater capability to take our players. So this is not an easy task. The good news is we play the best game of all, and I think there are strategies we can implement to improve revenues. The short-term strategy, better high-performance outcomes, will give you a nice quick hit on revenue. The best long-term strategy is growth in participation, more boys and girls in the game. So, look, if I thought someone could do a better job, I'd step away immediately. It's not an easy task. I'm committed to doing it, and I'm enjoying doing it.
We run a very open-door policy here. We've had our fiercest critics through this door in this very room on many occasions, and we agree. Their message is, 5 teams, more money for community. I mean, we agree. But the challenge is that none of those, and the offer remains on the table. You have to fund it, right? The easiest thing to do, right, is to provide, commentary. That's fine. Look, in some ways, the fact that we've had so much commentary on this actually is also perversely a sign that people are actually emotionally engaged. If they're just disengaged, that they're actually and I know we're clearly focusing at the moment on the impact of a team may go. There are a range of rugby stakeholders and very prominent and knowledgeable stakeholders who actually say going to 4 teams is correct. So there's two sides to this debate. Naturally, the focus at the moment from the commentary is on the team's game, but there are people that support it. We've not, over the couple of years we've been engaging, we've not had concrete solutions that demonstrate how you get more money in. Yes, we're not doing enough for grassroots. Well, this is a decision we've made today, to put money into grassroots. We've heard that message and we believe it's very, very important, but we haven't seen models, and I test these with people, about are they attending? Why are they not attending games? This is questions we're asking all the time. We haven't seen the concrete. So we'll take and the critics are open door policy to Bill or I. We're happy to have those discussions. We're interested in the health of Australian rugby, and if they've got ideas, we want them. We want to hear them.
Bill, will you seek reappointment in favour?
Look, I've had a discussion with the board, and I am here totally at the whim of the board, right? As long as the board has confidence in me, I will remain. The minute they lose confidence in me, I will happily step aside. I love the game. I think the game has some challenges. I'm committed to addressing them, and I will stay for as long as I can make a contribution.
So you will seek reappointment?
I'm not going to seek. I came in originally on a 5-year agreement. I'm not going to seek another 5-year agreement. I will basically continue to work for the board for as long as they and I feel I can make a constructive contribution.
And Cameron, you obviously feel he is making a contribution.
This is Bill's an incredibly challenging job, and it's very obviously easy to target Bill, but there are some serious governance challenges in our game, and and Bill's made an enormous contribution, and a lot of the things we've achieved, extraordinary achievements the game has made in the last 5 years tend to sort of get washed over and to focus on some other areas of concern. But at whatever point Bill and the board decide he transitions out, you want to make sure his success is set up for success, and I think we need to see some changes in the way the game is governed to make the success. And I think Bill at the moment is doing an extraordinary job under very difficult circumstances. We also need to remember that Bill doesn't get the credit for rebuilding relationships internationally. I know we indicated that we've had some challenges at SANZAR, and obviously we didn't perhaps get the Trans-Tasman agreement from the Kiwis, but it's fair to say that we have achieved a lot at the international table and in SANZAR, which has benefited Australian rugby because of Bill's diligence in rebuilding some relationships that were pretty badly burned prior to his arrival. So that alone has benefited Australian rugby enormously. Now, it doesn't get seen, but I can tell you we see it, and we see the benefit and the impact of that.
Bill, the changes that are made probably, if you're going to see benefits, won't happen for a few years in terms of the financial turnaround. So do you think the position you're in makes you better equipped than perhaps somebody else to see that through over a number of years?
Well, look, I'm not going to comment about in relation to somebody else. I don't know who somebody else is, but your fundamental point is right. To grow the revenue of the game, we need to have greater success at the elite level of the game. That is the greatest correlation with revenue, elite success. The long-term best correlation is with growth and participation. More young boys and girls starting the game today will set the game up for success in 10, 15, 20 years. So there's no easy solution here when you operate in the world's most competitive winter sports market, but that's why our obligation as administrators of the game is to make the right decisions for the future of the game, and that's what I think we're doing.
Cameron, will you push, given your acknowledgement that this current arrangement may not be the arrangement going forward for years to come in the next broadcast deal, will you continue to push for that Trans-Tasman deal? I understand that Steve Chu didn't go for it, but anecdotally, a lot of the New Zealand public want it, and perhaps some of the private owners want it as well. Will you continue to push it at that New Zealand rugby union level?
Look, I think we'll continue to. We're obviously looking to the next format. First of all, I think we should say that this 15-team competition is a better competition. I mean, if you look at what it's tried to do is address some of the concerns around integrity. So we've got as close to a round robin as we can get. So you play everybody bar one team in either conference, which is a lot better than the current arrangement. The finals thing will have more integrity because you've got the top finisher of each conference in the next 5. You get, I think we get one more. We get more. I think a guaranteed home and away. So there's a lot more. This is a much better looking competition. So I think what we'll do is we'll assess it over the 2 years that it operates, and then we'll look and say, well, you know, has it got sustainability, or can it evolve? You know, that will also depend a little bit. You know, I mean, the reality is we are partners with South Africa, so it'll depend a little bit around what opportunities they might be pursuing in terms of, you know, conferences that might be closer to their time zone.
Having said that, though, at some point,
so we'll definitely continue the dialogue around that.
But you must have been willing to cut South Africa free if you investigated that as a. I mean, I know they're partners, but if it makes sense, then you're willing to cut them free.
Well, but we're not doing that in isolation from any other partners. I should say, you know, there were also scenarios being discussed that might have seen other people cut free. You know, so you know they're all, you know. I mean, we had open, frank discussions. It wasn't a question of cutting it free. It's saying, is there a better format where other people, you know, that other people can find conferences that work for them? It wasn't a situation of doing things around. But at the end of the day, there's not an appetite at the moment. You know, when that appetite emerges, you know, we will always continue to push it. We think it's got merit, but at the moment, you know, this is the one that's actually got the majority or the consensus support from SANZAR, and it's the one we're going to pursue. But we'll keep talking about what options we can get.
Did Fox Sports express a preference for to keep 5 teams in your consultation?
Look, we're not getting into commercial discussions. You know, there were 13 broadcasters. We've been through the process. As I said in my opening, you know, Fox have been an incredibly supportive partner since the inception of Super Rugby, and you know, we have, you know, really value their input, and we had some, you know, very constructive discussions with them, and we appreciate their support.
You mentioned validating data in terms of your decision, but you also mentioned the passion of fans and them expressing that. The Force fans seem to be extremely passionate. Will that count when you're making a decision?
Yes, it will, but understand fan passion should convert to revenue. Right, so actually everything we do, whether growing participation, engaging with fans, delivering high performance outcomes, ultimately it should all be financially measurable. That's why your overarching guideline here will be financial sustainability of the game, with the related you know, high performance impacts.
I mean, obviously, and this is where I guess we have to detach and look at it in a very commercial sense. Under pressure, obviously, under threat, you know, you can generate activity. It's a question around, is that sustainable in that market long term? So you know, look, it's difficult. We've got what we do. Look, quite frankly, we anticipate we'll probably have to provide financial assistance going forward because, you know, the revenue trends, even with 4 teams, we're trying to minimise that and make a decision. Where do we think the least financial impact to the ARU is going to be? But also, are we in a market where we think there is long-term potential?
And that's the nature of professional sport. I mean, there isn't a code in Australia that runs a competition or oversees a competition which every club is profitable and stands on their own 2 feet. So can you characterise where that sweet spot is, you know, of you guys investing, continuing to support the professional footprint, but not putting all of your money into it?
Yeah, look, in the ideal world you would want to have 4 standalone profitable Super Rugby clubs. Now that's maybe a bridge too far, but as a minimum you would like the aggregate of the 4 to be at least break even, right? So it becomes a self-sustaining competition structure. You know, your point, I point you to these. There are some international trends here which shouldn't be ignored, right? The NFL is the most bulletproof financial competition in the world, and their game attendance declines in 16 over 15, and ratings declines were substantial. So these are global trends, not just Australian trends, but our obligation is to find the sustainable financial model.
And is 4 teams the sweet spot? I mean, by this pie chart, maybe we should just go to 3.
You know, it's a good question because that chart is significant, right? It shows erosion of our high performance results ever since the expansion started. So that's why, you know, what we've got today is an announcement that gets us through till the end of the current broadcast period of 2020, and there's more work to be done to determine the best structure going forward.
If you take out Australian derbies on that chart, the result is even worse. The decline is worse.
So you're suggesting that we could go to 3 teams?
No. No, we're not. No. There is. We're not going to 3 teams, and we're emphatic about that. Yeah, we feel that 4 teams provides the balance between expansion and the ability to get financial sustainability and investment in grassroots. We're not contemplating going to 3 teams.
What about a return to 5 teams in future models? You talk about potentially shaping up in conference, you know,
I don't want I don't want to speculate on those sort of things. You know, except to say that you know, we would be extremely cautious on any further expansion. Not to rule it out, but we'd be extremely cautious on the business model of further expansion. It may occur under future things, but we would be extremely cautious.
Is this decision effectively an admission that rugby in this country is in trouble?
Well, in terms of our performance, you know, it's not where we need it to be. But in terms of participation numbers, actually, it's very strong in some respects. I mean, the participation uplift we're seeing in segments of the game is actually extremely encouraging. You know, there is still the fact that we've had such an energetic debate, although it's not necessarily all been supportive of this decision, is actually people care. You know, so you know, there's a lot of support and passion, but there's a direct correlation between the performance of your elite teams and the revenue, and also just the mood around the game, right? The overwhelming feedback I get from fans you know, I was at a Super Rugby game on Saturday night. You know, probably the second half by the Brumbies was probably the best 40 minutes of rugby I've seen at Super Rugby this year. You know, the overwhelming feedback I got talking to people in the car park and out around the ground was, we want our teams to win more. You know, when you're not winning, right, it's just not enjoyable. Right? Simple as that, and that leads to, yes, that part of the mood problem is that we're not winning. But if you go out, as I also did on the weekend, to schoolboy rugby and sevens, I went to sevens schoolboy rugby the week before, schoolboy and club rugby. There's a lot of enthusiasm out there, but they're feeling the pain too because they're not getting the funding. So, you know, rugby is got a great, you know, support, but people don't feel good when we're not winning, and that's the reality. We're not winning.
Can I also add, because clearly the focus here is on the men's 15s game. 10 years ago, we had no investment in sevens of any significance. We've now got a really, probably the fastest growing sport in the world is women's sevens rugby. And our men's sevens is another source of investment. There's also taken talent from the 15 side of the game. Despite all of this, today we are number 3 in the men's 15s ranking worldwide, number 1 worldwide in the women's sevens, and number 5 worldwide in the men's sevens. So we actually punch way above our weight class. We set very bold objectives, which I think is appropriate, but actually if you look at our world rankings, we're doing okay.
At the heart of the expansion to 18 South African politics, essentially, which has led us to the financial situation we're in now, is there in future any way that you can operate Super Rugby without South African involvement, or will it affect the Rugby Championship? Can they operate independently, or does it have to be?
I just want, 18 has not led us to the situation we're in today. 18 has led to a fan engagement, yes, but 18 or not, it's not sustainable. The 18 has not caused us now to drop a team. No, not at all.
So the 15 is caused.
The expansion, this began almost immediately upon expansion. We've been suffering financially. We've been suffering before the expansion, we were suffering financially. The expansion to 18, you know, has, you know, we agree the competition is not engaged, but it's not that expansion which has directly led to this decision at all.
But if you're going back to 15, then don't those problems remain?
It's less because we're obviously still, you know, we're still going to have to fund 4 teams, not 5, but we're still saying we're still going to struggle financially because, you know, it's, you know, we've got a whole series of trends we've got to deal with regard to performance and, you know, attendance at games and declining ratings and all those things. But there's no the decision to go to 18. Yes, we acknowledge that was, you know, an expansion decision that hasn't worked out. But that has not caused us to go to drop a team. You know, the trends of the unsustainability were clear before that. We'd hoped that the expansion might bring additional revenue and viewing and other things which might make the 5 teams sustainable, but it didn't. But it was certainly clear before that we couldn't. I said almost immediately upon expansion we couldn't sustain it financially.
Can the Rugby Championship operate with independence in Super Rugby or not?
No, they're intertwined, and we have to remember that the SANZAR actually governs Super Rugby and the Rugby Championship, and the Rugby Championship is a very important component and a very key revenue driver from both a broadcast and from an ARU perspective. So you can't separate that. So I mean, part of any discussion around trying to maintain, you know, what is, you know, on the whole, you know, although we are fierce rivals on the field. What is generally a pretty good working relationship with SANZAR is actually that we want to play Super Rugby, but we also want to play Test matches, and that's quite critical. So you can't separate the two.
What were the reasons why New Zealand didn't want to explore?
You can talk to New Zealand. I mean, I think you can work it out with them.
But is that the preferred model for you guys?
Look, it's an attractive model because of time zone and fan engagement, but the reality is that that's not a model that was supported at this point in time. We're supportive of the 15. We think that's a model that will work, and we'll continue to explore other models. But it's not a model that was supported at this point.
You guys were encouraged, when you were encouraged to show some guts at one stage in the last couple of weeks, and just say stuff here, we're going to go on our own and sit and wait and see how long New Zealand wanted to hop on a plane for 6 weeks and go and play Super Rugby in South Africa, and wait for them to come to you. Was that ever, and I know you said going it alone wasn't an option, but did you want to play the waiting game with New Zealand and have a face-off and beat your chest and play the tough guy for a while and see what happened?
Can I look, in a strategic sense, we've considered all of the options. Right, but what you are trying to deliver from these outcomes are better financial outcomes and better high performance outcomes. And ultimately the conclusion, if you went to a domestic only competition, is that you would struggle to match the revenue you get today, and you would struggle to improve your high performance outcomes. So while it's an option we considered, it's not a particularly good one.
You don't call a bluff unless you're prepared for the outcomes. And I've enjoyed the amount of people who've become urologists in this game and made assessments about anatomical requirements. The reality is, though, people say, oh, well, Australia should just tough it out. The Kiwis never fly over the top of you to play South Africa. You've got to be absolutely sure that's the case if you're going to play that card. Now, you may think it, but you don't know. We're in this to get the best outcome for Australian rugby. So with the other SANZAR part, everyone's looking at it from their own perspective. So you can't, you cannot play that card unless you're prepared for the outcome. May very well be that they do fly over the top of you.
And in that outcome,
and we don't know that. You may say it's a very remote possibility, but you can't. That would be catastrophic for Australian rugby. The domestic financial of a domestic competition, the financial outcome is catastrophic. So you play that card, even if there's a small risk that might occur. It's a very dangerous game to play. You try and collaborate with your joint venture partners.
If New Zealand called you bluff, would that have meant losing Bledisloe Cup tests?
Oh, I don't know all the hypothetics. I'm just saying that a domestic, calling the bluff and saying, well, we're just going to do it. They need us, right? Given the outcome, if we were cut out, given the outcome would be so catastrophic. Even if it is a remote possibility, it would be cavalier and it would totally be against the fiduciary responsibilities of the board to take that risk, unless you were 100% certain it wouldn't occur. So I think it is an easy comment, but you've got to be, we've got a responsibility for fiduciary. We have to make sure this entity is solvent. There have been times, that we've had to do solvency checks because the ARU is that is not a healthy situation to be in. You have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure the game is solvent. You cannot put the game or the ARU at risk if you're not sure of the outcome. It would just be irresponsible. It's not the duty of the board.
Given the enormous costs of having Japan and Argentina in competition, why is Australian rugby supported to keep them? And will they be financially assisting SANZAR at some point in the near future?
Look, I'd question the term enormous cost, right? Argentina brought with it some broadcasting revenue, and they also brought some colour and movement to the competition. I think the problems they've created is the travel component, right, and playing outside time zones. And so, look, that's why that's one of the issues we look at in the future structure of the competition from 21 forward.
Bill, this is one of those lines that often gets thrown back at you, but you've always maintained that rugby can't shrink to greatness. Yeah. Are you now arguing that it can?
Yeah, look, yes I am, in short. I've always been somebody who's preferred the idea of a national footprint, and I'm clearly now walking away from that, and it's unfortunate that we have to do that. But the economic environment we compete in today is such that I'm now utterly convinced this is the right decision. You can't expect this game to be healthy in the long term unless you have a growing participation base, more young boys and girls in the game. And we are sadly, seriously underinvested at that level of the game, and I simply cannot justify continued losses at the elite level with that problem in place.
It's really choosing where you want to shrink. I mean, yes, we're shrinking at the professional footprint, but we feel that is going to be offset by reinvesting, because otherwise, if we continue to try and support 5 teams that we have, we're going to shrink at the grassroots level. So it's a trade-off.
That extra grassroots funding, is that likely to be targeted towards states and Super Rugby teams, or is it an even spread?
Well, we haven't worked it out, and that'll change over. We want to. Our intention is to announce a quantum of commitment, and ideally over 5 years, so that although we know that goes beyond the broadcast agreement, but this gives us, I guess, to provide some certainty so we can actually have some long-term planning with a whole range of people as to where the best use of that money is. So we're not saying it's going specific to Super Rugby, it can be going into a range of places.
Would there be any threat to the Perth Blues though in a couple of years if the Force are the ones to go?
Contractually, we don't believe so, but we will have to wait and see what the Perth government's response would be in the event that the Force was eliminated.
And is the NRC safe in all of this? Has that been part of will it change because you're losing a team?
Look, we don't believe so. The NRC is a break-even entity in its own right, so there is no financial tax on the ARU from playing the NRC. It is a really essential part of our player development pathway, and we've been really pleased over the last 3 years how it's evolved.
Speaking of movement perception, how much does the perception that rugby is played by private schools needs to change?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, because private schools were, going back in time, the nursery of really elite talent. And the reality is, and when I went to a private school a long time ago, rugby was compulsory. So that's changed, and actually that's very fair that it's changed. It's fair for schools to offer their students a multiple list of sporting options. But we do want to make sure that rugby is a game for all. Rugby reflects the society it lives in, and that will result in a much greater focus on public schools. And we're doing that through Game On. We're doing that through the participation growth strategies that we're putting in place.
I mean, one of the obvious targets potentially for the increase in grassroots funding will be more development officers to get into public schools, as an example, and that's one of the areas we haven't been able to fund. So that's a classic example of where this additional funding could go to directly target growing the game in public schools, for example.
If players feel strongly enough to strike during the NRC over this, what will your response be?
Oh, we'll deal with that. We'll deal with that when it comes as a hypothetical. I mean, I don't, to cover that with the players.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That ran out.
Yeah.